we're looking at Western civilization theater dance. And so where did this really start? Well, it started actually, over 400 years ago with the silk trades, okay? So a lot of the dance that we see today has been influenced by all over Western Europe. Okay, so we've had folk dances, as we talked about earlier, that all societies and civilizations have had some sort of dance to either help show, a celebration of life, or maybe it's a rite of passage, or just for entertainment and fun. And so really what started happening as we became more settled and more agricultural societies, and we were trading amongst other nations, we were also trading parts of our cultures and our civilizations. So if we want to think, just thinking about the role geography has played in our exchange of ideas, and not just ideas and dance and art, but even our food and our styles. Even today, we're such a global society today. It's very quick. Our exchange of ideas are very quick. However, back then it took much longer. So, for example, even food. Noodles were actually first made in Asia, and then through the silk trade, then Greece, Italy. Well, we all eat noodles now, but there's a lot of different ideas, and dance is the same way. And I look at with the Greek civilization in particular, and I was actually fortunate enough to go visit Greece last summer for a dance history meeting. And they're the first ones to tell you that all good ideas in theater and dance has come from Greece. Oh, I'm not ready to say all, but I am going to say that they were a huge influence on how we view theater today. You can see this is a Greek amphitheater that was actually, when the Romans took over Greece, they sort of let Greece kind of do their own thing. They were very enamored and in awe of what they had done in Greece with their entertainment and their theater and their dance and their music. And so the Romans then took a lot of their marble and copied much of the architecture and the dance and the culture that was happening in Greece. Speaking of Greece, I like to think of history as happening in sort of two different ways. So we have Apollo, who was the god of, and considered to have dominion over music, dance, poetry, healing, reason, and intellectualism. And if you go and see the Apollo temple, it is very much ordered and very harmonic. Okay, so there's a lot of very orderly structure when you think of Apollo. He was the god of youth and light, and very controlled, okay? And then Dionysus was his half-brother, okay? And he was the Greek god of mystery, wine, intoxication. He has this sort of following this baklava, or they were not baklava, but bacchanalian sort of this frenzied, intoxicated, wild, insane, just very crazy. So like when I think of Dionysian forces, I think of that sort of chaotic force, the chaotic force that comes and disrupts, your orderly ideas. So for maybe if you're in college, you have your Monday through Thursday and it's very ordered, and you're working out and you're going to school, and then you have this Dionysian who has to come and break that up sort of throughout the weekend. I mean, that's one way to look at it, a very oversimplified way. But if you think of it in terms of evolution of ideas and culture, that's what happens. We try to contain and order something, and then these new ideas come and they create this revelry and this chaos that then breaks it up and then pushes it into a new direction. And that's how I'm going to be describing dance and the evolution of dance this semester, between these Apollonian and Dionysian forces. So here's some pictures of dance in ancient Greece. They have been dancing there. There's a lot of folk dancing. There's pictures, there's statues of like ancient dances. You can tell these are all very ordered. These in the upper left-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, the picture of the statues, and then the wedding dance along the bottom. They're very orderly, very orderly. Then you look at the lower left-hand corner of the screen, the Dionysian is sort of disordered. In the the center picture is a little more Dionysian, a little more disordered, okay? And we have the Roman civilization, which I talked about, how they had conquered Greek, and they began to import some of the Greek architectural structures, as mentioned before, but also their love for entertainment and dance as a form, as it was not part of a religious dances, but also as a part of an expression of a display. Okay, and so what some of the things the Romans are famous for and are credited to bringing into the theater and dance are comedy, exotic displays, and circus spectacles. So the circus spectacles you'd probably imagine when you think of like gladiators or something, and you have, these crazy spectacles of people and large animals, or people in chariots, very, very dangerous ideas. But something that is also less known is that they were also very into comedy displays. And so when you hear the word slapstick comedy, it was literally a stick that had like a slap on it, that when you're trying to like make a noise like you were hitting somebody, it would slap, and it would give it that slapstick. So that's where that actually comes from, ancient Rome, which I found very interesting. When the fall, so then again we start having these Dionysian forces, the Crusades, the Dark Ages that are bringing in. So this back here in the Roman civilization, after they sort of, was a chaotic overtake of Greece, and then they took over some of these ideas, they began to codify and organize and become very Apollonian in their own civilization. And then we have that Dionysian force that comes up and sort of shakes everything up in the history. So we have the Crusades and the Dark Ages, and during this time there was dance mania, where people felt like if they just danced for hours and hours and hours, that would somehow get rid of the Black Plague. Or like Tarantism was actually a dance that was made from being bit by a spider. So so that is sort of this Dionysian thing that I'm talking about. All right, so we had the collapse, we had religious upheavals, political instabilities. All this is happening and affecting the dance. So as we've sort of organized these Greek, very organized dances, then people are having these sort of frenzied type dances, okay? And then we start to calm down, and we're going to start codifying these dances. And this is a very abbreviated version to get us to 1581. And this is actually in 1581 when the first ballet was choreographed. So ballet actually came. It's borrowing all these ideas from both of the dance mania and the folk dancing and the wedding dancing. All of this stuff began to be explored in the court dancing, okay? And in Italy, which was sort of the cradle of the Renaissance, they were doing all of this court dancing. Now, at the time, it was only men who danced in these dances, okay? Women were not allowed at that time to be on stage. And the Medici family, which is still very prominent in Italy, Florence, Italy, that's where the stronghold is still today. Catherine de' Medici wanted to give her niece a celebration. They were marrying, they were joining forces with Italy and France through this marriage of her niece to King Henry IV of France. And so like all Medicis, Catherine was very politically adept, and she was a trendsetter in art and fashion, and she was very forward thinking. And so she wanted to put on this great display of dance. So she commissioned, so she was sort of the first producer. She commissioned the choreographer, Balthazar de Beaujolais, to choreograph this dance called Ballet Comique de la Reine. So Balthazar was the first choreographer to choreograph this ballet, similar to as we know it now. So it was very codified. It was set on a stage. It had costumes. The subject matter was mythological, and it was intended to flatter the French and visiting nobilities, but also to remind the guests that the Medicis of Florence, Italy still controlled Europe, were still on the forward edges of art and culture and fashion, and most importantly at that time, the papacy. So it was performed by the men of the court, as I mentioned earlier, the women of the day were not allowed to perform in ballet, which is ironic because when we think of ballet today, I think most of us think of women. So it's actually the men who performed, and at that time they were supposed to be they were expected to be very adept at fencing and accomplished in music and able to dance the minuet without tripping. So it was highly aspired to be in the ballet, which was a show of political power and prowess. So it's very different than how we see men and women in ballet today. So again, it's important to remember that Catherine de' Medici was the first producer to have Balthazar choreograph a ballet that would be performed in France. Now that part being performed in France is very important also, because as the marriage of her niece came and this Italian and French relationship began, they were also importing all things from Italy, whether it was styles, ballet, ideas, all of this was happening. So this brings us into ballet de corps. So we're talking about this evolution. So it was a very big, important moment with the comique, the ballet back here, the Ballet Comique de la Reine. That was a big, important moment, and now everybody in that time period is very excited about ballet. They're going to keep pushing, as we do with anything. We keep pushing boundaries and keep trying to improve and make it better. And so that's what the Ballet de Corps is improving upon, what Catherine de' Medici started. And so they were doing things like jigs and the pavane. And the steps actually, though, came from middle and lower classes. They were from old folk dances, and they made them more elaborate by adding these extremely large headpieces, which made them slow the steps down because they couldn't bounce around, or they certainly didn't want their headpieces to fall off. And again, even the female roles were played by boys and men, so it was still only men who performed in public, and they were performing old folk dance steps, which they slowed down and made more sophisticated because of the costuming and the staging of these dances. Okay, so this is the time period known as Ballet de Corps, which is through early 1600s to the late 1600s. Again, only men on stage. So we have a good 100-year chunk where women never were allowed on stage. And this brings us to 1650. So this is the dancing king. This is King Louis XIV of France. Now you can see how he's posturing his leg out in front in this photo, and that's because he had very large calf muscles. And at the time, that was like similar to men maybe showing off their abdominal muscles today. Back then, you would show off your calf muscle, and it was a very it was you were very cool. You were in high class society if you had large calf muscles and you did ballet. This was what made you awesome. And Louis XIV did ballet every single day. And he appointed Pierre Beauchamp to be his private ballet tutor, where they worked together daily for nearly 20 years. So stage dancing and social dancing now are beginning to draw apart further because of that first ballet, the Ballet Comique de la Reine, that put it on stage, and we continued for the next 100 years dancing on stage, slowing down the steps, making them more sophisticated, adding costumes and shoes and tights to these stage dances, where social dancing stayed much more in the villages and in the celebrations and rite of passages, where all dance really has begun. So this was really the impetus for our theater dance as we know it today. So this is important. Louis XIV really made what we know of ballet. He did it in 1650. What he did is he started the first school of dance. So this was the first time there was an institution established in the Western world specifically for learning ballet, okay? And he also codified ballet in French terminology, because when he started that school, he decided, well, how are we going to pass this knowledge down once I'm gone or Pierre Beauchamp is gone? And so they wrote out all of the terminology in ballet. And that's why, like plie, that's one of our ballet movements, is a bend of the knees. Okay, tendu means to extend, and you're extending the foot, tendu. These are all in French terms, and then even today, I just finished teaching a ballet class using that same terminology that was, I say it much, I say it incorrectly, but I'm still using the same terms that came about in 1661. So there's a little more, so he was, there's some more information on this if you're more interested in Louis XIV. So then that brings us into Ballet dell'Opera. Okay, and this was when women started actually dressing up like men, so then they could dress up like women to be on stage. So the masks were taken away, okay, and so then they started showing like human faces, and then women actually started to be allowed on stage. So that was in the mid 1600s. So 100 years after ballet had been first performed, women started to become on stage. So the first female dancer to appear on the roster of the Paris Opera Ballet was Madame La Fontaine. She was born in 1665. She didn't go on stage till, much later, closer to early 1700s. Francois Prévost, Marie Camargo, and Marie Sall. So there is sort of this lineage here of teacher to student. Okay, so Madame La Fontaine was the first female dancer. And then we had Francois Prévost, who then began, after her career of performing, began to teach Marie Camargo and Marie Sall. And they were both very important in the Romantic ballet. So it brings us through to the 18th century, and now we call this the Ballet d'Action. So the first part of ballet, just to kind of recap what's going on, because we're going through this. The first part of ballet, it's mostly just court dancing. It was all done by men. Ballet de corps was more bringing in jigs and minuets and more folk dancing, and then changing the steps to slow them down to accompany their costumes, okay, to allow them to wear these big fancy headdresses and masks on their face. And then we get into the late 1650 to 1680 with King Louis XIV, and they took off the masks and began to further develop the ballet steps, bringing in terminology in dancing schools. Okay, and that continued to happen through the 1700s. So now, since we have these institutions of dance, we have a place for teachers to instruct students. So it's like this momentum that is moving towards the 18th century, which is ballet d'action. So they've taken off their masks and they're pushing the technique. They're making all of the steps that they were doing then bigger and brighter and stronger. Okay, there's men and women on stage. And then at the end of the 1700s, okay, at the end of the 1700s, we have the first ballet that began to have men and women and dancing in sort of everydayness. So they were not gods or goddesses or mythological creatures, but they were in the village dancing. La fille mal gardée literally means the girl who was badly guarded, because she was engaged to this one person who she did not like at all, and she really wanted to be engaged to this other man. And so she takes the man she wants to be engaged to and locks herself in a closet. And then, of course, she's been compromised at this point, and so they have to get married. And that's how she was badly guarded. How could anybody leave her alone in the closet for 2 minutes? So it's just funny, and interesting when you start looking at some of how and what was danced about and how that relates to what was happening politically and sociologically at that time. So this brings us into women and the rise of point and prominence. Okay, so we had La fille mal gardée. We're still developing the technique. We're still making things, pushing what our bodies can physically do. Okay, so we're really, and this is all moving much quicker than it did, say, in the 1500s, because of our technology that is evolving at the same time. So people are able to get to other locations. Ideas are spreading quicker and quicker. So in 1832, Marie Taglioni was the first woman to ever dance on full point in La Sylphide. And this takes us into the Romantic Ballet era. So her father, Philippe Taglioni, was her teacher, and she was a very morally correct woman. She did not ever want to show her shoulders or her legs, and so their costuming all went down below the knee and mostly covers the shoulders or has some sort of like chiffon or something on the shoulders. Now the arms, whenever you see a romantic ballet, that will be marked by the costuming and the arm positioning, which actually was first done and put into place by Marie Taglioni. So let's take a second and look at some romantic ballets. The three things that I want you to remember about romantic ballets: they have a soft port de bras, which means their arms are slightly bent, okay? And lower, not how you would see in like New York City Ballet today, where they are much more extended and linear. So the arms are very soft and bent slightly. Legs are lower. What they did on point in romantic ballets was not a lot. So there was not a lot of point. There was a lot of little jumps and a little bit of rising to give them this ethereal look. Okay, so let's keep going here. And let's take a look at some romantic ballet. So this is Giselle. This is one of my favorite scenes in the ballet Giselle. Giselle is a story about a young woman with a heart condition who goes out into the forest and falls in love with a man who's actually royalty, pretending to be a peasant hunting in the forest. And they fall in love and they do all this dancing. And Hilarion, who's actually in love with Giselle, he comes and sees that this man is a fraud. So he calls in the royalty and they come down, and he's actually already engaged to somebody else. And in some versions, Giselle stabs herself in the heart. In other versions, she has a heart condition, but she ends up dying and joining the mass of jilted women who now haunt the forest. And when men come into their forest at night, they dance them to death. And so this is Hilarion coming into the Willys forest. And I often wonder, this is a very old German folktale, I often wonder if that's where we turn, that gives me the willies comes from. So here is Act 2, when Hilarion's coming into the forest and the willies are going to try to dance him to death. Here they are, they're going to dance them, they're chasing them down. So notice the long white skirts, and they're just doing lots of runs and little jumps and a few balances. Nothing very big on point. And here they come. This is my favorite part. And you die now. So they end up killing him. They make him go away. So that gives you an idea about romantic ballet. So we're going to just go through a little bit more into romanticism in ballet. So the reason that, so we already discussed that Marie Taglioni was the first woman to ever dance on full point in La Sylphide, which was choreographed by her father. Okay, but here's some of the when romantic ballets are still performed today in several, Giselle is a very popular ballet. La Sylphide is still performed today. They do reconstructions, and the ballerinas then take that stylized part of ballet and they dance it in that way. So Romanticism can also be found in art, in Turner and Géricault, Thomas Cole, the literature of Byron, Rousseau, Gautier, Washington Irving, and in the music of Schubert, Wagner, Paganini, and Chadwick, and others. So Romanticism is very much alive throughout the arts and culture. And it often deals with ideas of supernatural themes and exotic locations. So India and Egypt and Africa and Scottish Highlands. So the romantic hero would be an idealist, and maybe he'd be discontent, and then the ballerina would come as this like exotic creature, or a woman who dies under unfortunate circumstances and comes back from the grave, like in Giselle. So the Romanticism, let's go over, there's often this sort of searching for unattainable, etherealism, the costumes, you'll know right away it's a romantic ballet when you go if the costumes have long white skirts, their arms are slightly bent, and the point work is not as sophisticated. So here are some pictures, the Romantic age in ballet. So we have La Vivandière. This is the pas de quatre, which is 4 ballerinas of the time, and it was all done. It's sort of the epitomizes what romantic ballet looked like. And all of these women, Taglioni, Carlotta Grisi, Fanny Chirito, and Lucille Grand, they were like kind of what our NBA or football, they were like Peyton Manning and Michael Jordan, I guess that's an old, LeBron James. Okay, so like that's what they were in society at that time. They were very famous. They were very sought after, and there's artists. Okay, but that's what you did if you had political power or money or prestige or any kind of means. You would go to the theater and you would see these women, and it was a very, very big deal. They were very famous. And then there was also men who influenced romantic ballet. Then most of these men